Hello and welcome. Welcome to our member appreciation event. My name is Laura Milan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining you today from Minneapolis, Minnesota, the ancestral, unceded, and contemporary current land of the Dakota people who have lived on and cared for this land for thousands of years. We begin all of our Children in Nature Network events with an Indigenous land acknowledgement, and we welcome you to share the native land from which you're joining us in the chat. If you're not familiar with the history of your location, you can learn more in the native land map that we are adding in the chat, and I believe on screen right now. It's a really wonderful resource. Land acknowledgements, they're really important, but they are just one small part of truth-telling and honoring Indigenous history and Indigenous people. And there's so much more that we can do in terms of advocacy and action. We're including some links also in the chat on how you can support Indigenous people in your community and around the world. In that list, there's a link to a recent Native American Heritage Month story that we published in Finding Nature News. In that article, you'll find dozens of resources, organizations, calls to action. So thank you for taking a look at those. I'm really happy to welcome you to today's member appreciation event. Members make our work possible. They truly do, and we are grateful. There are many ways that people can spend their time and valuable resources, and we're grateful that you are part of the Children in Nature community, the Children in Nature movement. If you're not a member, we welcome you to join an incredible global community of leaders who show their deep commitment to the health and well-being of children and our planet by supporting our work. Christy, our network engagement manager, will talk more about membership at the end of this event. And now, before we get started, I'm going to go over just a couple of logistics. Closed captioning is enabled. When we move to the Q&A with our wonderful panelists, use the Q&A feature that you'll find along the bottom of your Zoom screen for any questions that you might want to ask the panelists. Looks like we already have a great chat going, but it's enabled for all attendees. Please feel free to join the conversation. And this event is being recorded. In about 2 weeks, we'll send you a recording, and it'll also be on our website. And one small change in today's lineup, it is indeed the season for colds and flus, and one of our panelists, unfortunately, Dr. Hannah Hamdi, is sick. She won't be joining us, but I couldn't be happier to tell you that our president and CEO for the Children in Nature Network, Sarah Milligan-Toffler, is joining us, joining our wonderful panel of experts, and couldn't be happier to have her joining us. I'm now pleased to introduce our moderator for today's event, Jesús Aguirre, who also serves as chair of the Children in Nature Network Board of Directors. He's a wonderful chair. Jesús is CEO of the Waterloo Greenway Conservancy in Austin, Texas. And with his leadership, this community-focused, community-centric conservancy is creating a very cool, innovative linear park system around Waller Creek in downtown Austin, if you're familiar with that area. It's going to serve as a catalyst for remarkable economic growth and rejuvenation of important cultural landmarks. Prior to his work in Austin, he was the superintendent of the Seattle Department of Parks and Recreation for almost 6 years, and he brings more than 20 years of public service leadership in major U.S. cities, including Los Angeles, New York City, Phoenix, and Washington, D.C. You might not know this, but Jesús has also worked in education. For those of you who know him, did you know he started in education as a middle school science teacher and ultimately moved on to serve as state superintendent of education for the District of Columbia. He and his wife co-founded a nonprofit K-8 dual language charter school in Phoenix for 10 years. And today, in addition to our board, he serves as chair of the board of the National Recreation and Park Association, the NRPA, and he's a member of the American Academy for Park and Recreation Administration. It's quite a resume. Thank you for joining us today, Jesús.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's exciting to be with all of you today. I will start off by saying that I am joining you all from Austin, Texas, which is the unceded ancestral homeland of the Sana, Tonkawa, Lipan Apache, Comanche, and Tecan people. And I really appreciate Laura and the Children Nature Network sharing the resources as we continue to seek ways to support our Indigenous communities. But it is a pleasure to be with you all today. And as Laura mentioned, I'm sad that Dr. Hannah Hamdi is ill today, but we are so lucky to have our very own President and CEO of the Children Nature Network, Sarah Milligan-Toffler, joining us. So welcome, Sarah, and thanks for stepping in. Also joining us today is Dylan McDowell, who serves as the Executive Director for the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. Thanks for joining us today, Dylan. And then rounding out this impressive panel today is Amanda O'Rourke, who serves as the Executive Director of 880 Cities. Amanda also serves as the co-chair for the Children Play and Nature Committee of the World Urban Parks. So thanks for being here. Good to see you, Amanda. So let's jump right in. It's exciting to have all of you here, and we're going to have a great discussion, and I think we're going to open it up for questions from the audience as well in a bit. But let's start off with just giving each of you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that you do. And of course, this session is Trend Watch. So as you talk about what you're doing, please note any trends or approaches to health and well-being that might influence, impact, or present opportunities for the folks who are children and nature leaders, like many of the folks that are on the call today. So if I can, Amanda, can I ask you to kick us off there?
Yes, Jesús, thank you. And thank you to all my co-panelists for sharing space with me today. I am joining from Toronto, Canada, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and Petun First Nations. And grateful to be on Treaty 13 and Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant territory. At 880 Cities, we are mindful of broken covenants and violations of human and treaty rights, and affirm the UN's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Thank you so much for sharing the resources. It's a really fantastic resource that we use as well. So yes, my name's Amanda. I'm the Executive Director of 880 Cities, which is a nonprofit organization. While we're based here in Toronto, we do work internationally, and I wear a couple of different hats, including being on that Children Play Nature Committee for World Urban Parks. And our mission is really on igniting action and challenging the status quo to create healthier, more equitable, and more sustainable cities and communities. We're guided by a very simple, but we think powerful idea that if everything we did in our cities was great for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, we think if you start there, you can create better cities for everyone. And, our vision is really to create and support healthy, happy cities for people to grow up in and grow old in. And recognizing sort of human and planetary health are inextricably linked, which is actually one of the key trends that I wanted to sort of share with everyone, that I think that there is absolutely been a really positive reinforcement. And I know environmental organizations and social justice organizations and health-based organizations, I think, have been talking about this for a long time, but it does feel much more mainstream now to talk about human and planetary health as connected. I've seen that clearly sort of being articulated more widely. At 880 Cities, our actual work on the ground is actually bringing people together to transform mobility systems and public spaces, because we believe these are really important assets to supporting health and well-being of people of all ages and abilities and backgrounds. So that's kind of our platform. We use the streets, the parks, the public spaces, the parking lots, the waterfronts, all the spaces that belong to all of us, we think are really transformative, potentially transformative tools for climate action, action on health equity, and improving access to healthy urban space. And with that, I would also say another key trend, and then I'll stop talking and share time and space with my co-panelists, is I think, there's also been a real healthy interrogation of what is considered equitable practices. And I think that that's really positive. Uh, I think organizations and certainly people who look more like me and have a lot of power and privilege, there's been some healthy sort of internal work on how do we actually do the work of equity. And, I'm very inspired by Mitchell Silver, who is former commissioner of parks in New York City, and he said something to me once that really stuck. And he said, equity is not something you do, it's something you are. And I think there's been a real push, I think, in organizations and in nonprofits to think about how do we actually embody this work in all the relationships that we build, not just with equity deserving communities, but all the interactions that we're having with clients, with partners, with all the people that we need collectively to address, this very big existential crisis of climate change, which I think is also a crisis of connection or lack of connection, I guess, around lack of connection with the land and with each other. So those are some kind of high level things to kick us off, to get us going, that I've been thinking about and would love to discuss more with all the folks here.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Dylan, can you talk a little bit about your work and how that might impact or present opportunities for children and nature leaders?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So I'm Dylan McDowell. I'm the Executive Director of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. We work across the country, but I currently live in Salem, Oregon, which is I'm originally from Oregon, and Salem is the traditional lands of the Kalapuya people, which are now part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. So NCEL, just briefly, we're a nationwide network of over 1,400 state legislators, and we serve as a resource on all things environment, everything from wildlife and habitat to climate and clean energy, and very much outdoor engagement, outdoor recreation, outdoor equity and access are big pieces of that. We like to say that we are remote environmental staff for state legislators. Depending on where you are and what state, you may not know kind of the full breadth of how different it is across the country. If you're in states like Nevada, you only meet every other year. If you're in New Hampshire, you have 400 representatives and 23 senators or 24 senators. In states like New Mexico, they don't get paid and they don't have staff. And in states like Indiana, it's one staffer spread across 5 legislators managing schedules. And so by and large, state legislators have very limited capacity, and they're oftentimes folks working part-time and trying to really make positive change. Despite those barriers, we see just hundreds of bills introduced every year on environmental issues. And on outdoors, we saw this year alone more than 200 bills across 40 states related to outdoor education, access, equity, and recreation. And those are the positive ones. I'll put it that way. And so those are all good ones, which is exciting. I'm sure if you were to put some of the negative ones, even more. But to know that there's this continuing upward trend of legislators really thinking about the outdoors as an opportunity. And that's something we're really focused on, and kind of similar to what Amanda was just saying, and really the whole ethos of Children Nature Network is how do we think about the outdoors, about belonging in nature, time in nature as part of everything else we're thinking about, whether it's climate, whether it's belonging, whether we're talking about environmental justice opportunities and education and workforce development. So much of that is built into that. As part of NCEL, we have the privilege of working with Children and Nature Network on the Youth Outdoor Policy Partnership. I see they already beat me to the link in the chat. So we call that YOP for short, and we're also joined by the North American Association for Environmental Educators, as well as Nuestra Tierra, which is a group based in New Mexico that works on outdoor equity and is a true leader nationally on that. And so part of this YOP project is really compiling best practices and policy opportunities and being a clearinghouse for how for folks working at the state level can understand all these best ideas and new innovative approaches to how can you really think about time outside as moving that forward and being a solution for all these issues we care about. So I will also just note that this is something, I work at the state level primarily. We're always thinking about that federal intersection. And then in my personal life, I chair the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board in Salem. And it's for those here that work at the local level. I thought that states were under-resourced, and then working at the local level, you get an even closer view. Salem, Oregon has 175,000 people, and the city council does not get paid, and the mayor is on a 2-year term. It's also volunteer. And so it's a big lift to try and get things done. We just got ourselves onto the 10-minute walk commitment, which was long overdue. So that was exciting through Trust for Public Lands. But I think it goes to show the power of state and local action is by and far where this change is going to take place. So appreciate everyone being here, and I can talk more about some of the trends later, but I want to make sure I give time for everyone else.
Thanks so much, Dylan. Well, let's go to you, Sarah, and take advantage of the opportunity that we have you on this call. And can you share with us some of the work that Children Nature Network is doing across the country?
Sure, and I'll be really brief here. I trust that most folks that are on this call know a little bit about the Children in Nature Network. I hope you do. But one of the things that I'm most excited about right now is the launch of our new strategic plan, which is to advance equitable access to nature everywhere children live, learn, and play in 100 communities by 2025. We call this Nature Everywhere for short, and I think there's a link going in the chat there. And Nature Everywhere really is building on what we've learned over the past, 15 plus years of providing technical assistance, training, resources, support, et cetera, to communities to advance equitable access to nature, right? And talking with them about what are the real barriers and what does it take to get to transformational change. And so we've really reorganized the way we provide our programs and services to really meet the needs of communities. Over the past few months, 19 communities were selected through a competitive application process to join a new Nature Everywhere cohort that launched over the last couple of weeks with some in-person vision labs, very exciting and fun. And those communities will be receiving 2 years of strategic planning support, technical assistance, startup funding to develop community-driven plans for connecting children more equitably to nature-based experiences and learning. So one of the exciting things about this initiative, and for folks that are familiar with our Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative with the National League of Cities, that was a cohort that we ran sort of opportunities to join every 3 years or so. And so that was kind of a long window to wait. We're going to be opening up opportunities to join a Nature Everywhere cohort on more of a rolling basis. So there'll be a couple of opportunities to join next year as well. So hopefully some folks on the call will be thinking about maybe pulling together a team and putting in an application to join those communities. So, and I can talk more about trends as we get into the next section. But thanks, Jesus.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you all for all the work you do, I guess, on behalf of not just communities everywhere, but our planet, because I do think, I appreciate what you were saying, Amanda, about sort of that the idea that is becoming much more a part of our conversation. So, as I think about what you all are saying, you think about what's happening in the work that we do. I'm struck by some of the themes that you guys are bringing together, which is all of this is related to some extent, right? And sort of the things that communities need and sort of the things that community members need in terms of being able to live in equitable, resilient, inclusive communities really are about all of the various sort of levers that are connected to the work that we all do here. So maybe if we can talk a little bit about some of those, how those trends intersect. And for example, Dylan, as you see work at the state level on policies related to both the work that you do on outdoor recreation and access, but how might that also intersect with public health policy and how you see that playing out in communities?
Absolutely. I think that to me, I feel like the outdoors and public health and wellness is one of the biggest opportunities that's still being figured out. I think the evidence in terms of policy levers, the evidence is there, and they're just time and time again, we see research that supports how much time outside makes a difference. I was actually on a panel with Dr. Hannah Hamdi several years ago, and I remember at that point there was a large conversation around Park RX programs, and so prescription parks, basically, can you give out passes for those that aren't familiar? And I remember in that panel, she talked about some of the concerns about HIPAA laws and how that it really limited the data in terms of, the research and how much of an impact is this having? Is this actually the right approach? And it's a shame she can't be here, and I hope she feels better because I know, she continues to work on that. But I think that intersection in terms of you have legislators really trying to figure that out, and you have folks, Washington has a pilot program on Parks RX, and to try and do a new approach that's just getting started. Illinois just passed a bill on a outdoor RX grant program that they're trying to create in partnership with their Department of Health. So figuring out how you can put some state dollars to get some pilot programs to see how the outdoors can be beneficial, because I think we're seeing in some of these really great case studies how you can invest the same amount of money in our traditional healthcare system, or you can spend that money to get folks outside, and you're seeing those benefits, from everything from PTSD in veterans to just better mood and better health and everything else, mental health as well. And so I think for us, it's trying to think about how you bring people in that maybe don't always say like, oh, I'm an environmentalist, or someone who doesn't think about their work as environmental, but realizing that nature and time outside can be part of the solution of what they care about. So if they're a chair of a public health committee, for example. And the other piece I'll share in the chat here is just grabbing the link. We just put out a resource called, let's see, I don't know if I'll share it here in the host one, and then maybe you all can share it out for me for the chat or the tech folks. We've been talking too about how outdoors can be part of the climate solution. And I think right now there's a lot of focus around climate change and the climate crisis and how we think about that. But more and more, we're seeing ways that you can open up things like state dollars for climate change efforts that can include green space access, for example. So urban parks can be part of that. And you can take this bucket of money that's coming in and not just fund building resilience, which is so important, but also fund green space, which gives you better air quality, gives you temperature control in hot areas because you have local heat island effects and all these different benefits that people can then have pocket parks, et cetera. And so there's ways to tie that in, I think, in a way that gives you health benefits, climate benefits, and really all comes back to nature as the source.
Yeah, thank you. So Amanda, can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned the work you all do in cities internationally, both on obviously the parks and open space, but mobility systems. What are you seeing cities being able to leverage? What various systems to really improve communities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and also I think connects really closely to what Dylan was saying, because we actually work a lot closer with municipal levels of government than with state and national levels of government. So I think it's a nice sort of counter or like complement to what Dylan was talking about, because ultimately a lot of what we are seeing is certainly a lot of assets at the community level. I think there tends to be often this mindset of scarcity, which I think we really want to push up against. There's a lot of existing capacity happening in community. There's a lot of existing space that is accessible if we just open our minds and reorient our thinking about what could be the use of that space. A really great example of that is streets, which is where we do a lot of our work, is transforming streets from car-dominated spaces into spaces that actually invite public life and social activity and physical activity and connection with nature. If you think about all the space that our communities have that are basically belonging to all of us, I think the possibilities are really big. I think there is the challenge that we encounter a lot, and I'd be interested to hear from the other panelists about whether this resonates or what it looks like at those sort of more national and state levels, is that city systems aren't really built for this kind of collaboration, and they aren't really built with systems in place to support that grassroots action. And so, one of the things that I'm most excited about, and often where 880 Cities helps to support this, and I imagine Children in Nature Network does this kind of work too through your technical assistance programs and building these programs, is like we're providing this platform or this facilitation between very grassroots local leaders who have a lot of skills, who have a lot of capacity, who have a lot of knowledge, and connecting it really intentionally with city structures to try to build new architectures of collaboration or infrastructures of collaboration, which I think is very exciting, but also really hard to do because cities and governments are built on systems and rules, and it involves taking risks and breaking some rules and coloring outside the lines. And that's what I think the nonprofit sector does quite well, and what community kind of has a broad vision about, but it's connecting those pieces that is the challenging bit, but totally doable. And I think it's way more doable when you have a tangible like a project on the ground where community can see a physical transformation. The great work that Children in Nature Network does on schoolyards, it's very visible. Like you can see the physical transformation of space, or if we're doing a complete street makeover, we're changing a laneway from a place where garbage is collected to a space where people can connect. It's these very tangible projects that I think can start to open minds and change narratives, which I think is the more powerful, or one of the most powerful tools that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I've had such a privilege of working in a couple of different municipalities, and what you say is exactly right. Like cities aren't necessarily built for this kind of collaboration, but I do think that more and more across the country, cities and city workers or municipalities and jurisdictions are seeing that that's the only way we're going to get to both combating that culture of scarcity, but understanding that there are tons of resources out there. There's lots and lots of expertise, and it's just not being utilized because we're not coming together. So I very much hear that and appreciate that. And I think Sarah, as you think about the communities that we're working with Children in Nature Network, some of these communities have been very successful in being able to start those conversations and bringing the various people to the table. Can you talk a little bit about sort of maybe some of the roadblocks you're seeing that communities are facing, and more importantly, if you can highlight a couple of the places that are successfully able to break down those barriers and really build that collaborative effort to support children in nature.
Yeah, and it's great being with all of you and just hearing there's just a lot of alignment around, I think, the trends and the things that we're seeing, both the barriers and the opportunities. One of the big barriers is money. And, I really haven't ever met a person who says, connecting kids to nature is a bad idea. We shouldn't do that. That's stupid. Who cares about that? But when it comes down to it, I kind of describe it, the river has been flowing in one direction for such a long time, and getting that, the resource flows to go in another direction, in a smarter direction, can be really, really hard. One of the things, and this you're going to hear some resonant themes of what both Dylan and Amanda were talking about, but these multi-sector and public-private partnerships really are a solution, I think, to advancing equitable access to nature and ensuring that the work is funded. I will say that I think to really bring the public sector to the table, it very often requires a big idea and a big vision, and something that's really aligned to city priorities. And I think oftentimes in the nonprofit sector, and Dylan, you talked about this, and I think pilot projects are a good idea, and sometimes that's all you can get funded. But I also think that pilot projects that happen in the context or of a larger vision can motivate more people to come to that table. And And it's, I think, sometimes to get the attention of a mayor or to get the attention of, you know, a school district or, you know, superintendent or a parks director, it has to be big enough that that it rises to the level of something that they can even think about. So that's a trend that we're seeing really working. I mean, I will just say, you know, here in Atlanta, the Parks Department is now at the table with the school district, the watershed department, and local partners. And you know, they did come together and create a shared vision, and that took time, right? That was a process that we supported over the course of a year and a half or so, and you know, and trying to have it align with everybody's priorities. But now that it does, there's huge buy-in. And then we were able to work, and I think this is a space where, you know, private philanthropy can come in. They provided, we worked with a private philanthropist to put up a significant sum of money, but required a public match to unlock it. And, you know, it's amazing, but that's, you know, it's getting things moving forward, because, you know, they were saying that they didn't have money. And even if you say, like, look, we're not looking for a new pot, like, let's look at existing pots of money and how that can be redirected. It wasn't until that incentive was out there that they started to get creative. And so that's a strategy that we're seeing work. You know, I think the other thing, and, you know, Amanda and Dylan, you both alluded to this as well, but we're really seeing this focus on intersectional solutions, right? So there's so many issues facing communities, and, you know, if we're thinking about, you know, putting forth solutions that are addressing, you know, climate change, mental health crisis, educational outcomes, community connectedness, and really designing and thinking smart about that, it just brings so many more people to the table. And again, I think can help unlock different funding pots. So.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. And, you know, I'll sort of underscore the point about the need for creativity and partnerships. I mean, I'm really fortunate to be in Austin, Texas right now, where the city and the community have really come together around this big visionary project, and all this work was done before I got here, but it really took both tenacious and really energetic visionaries that were not part of the public system to convince the public system to make this significant generational investment. And now, you know, you do see sort of, you know, we work closely with the Parks and Recreation Department that is very open and very sort of thoughtful about partnerships and how we leverage the expertise in communities. Similarly with the Watershed Protection Department and the rest of the city, it's just been really impressive. And I think as I do this work and talk to communities across the country, this is really the model. Like, I would say, if you were to ask me the trend, it is about sort of how you leverage all of the resources that already do exist in communities that can supplement some of the challenges. You know, when I was in Seattle, we would talk a lot about the fact that, and in Washington, D.C., that we're, no matter how well funded a Parks and Recreation agency is or community is, you're never going to have the resources to meet every need and expectation of the community. So you have to look for other things. And so I think it's a really powerful part of the conversation. So I guess I'll expand that to Dylan and Amanda as well. You know, talk a little bit about, if you can, what are the communities that are being successful, and how are they managing to sort of pull those levers and bring those places to those various resources together to move the needle on the work that we're doing. Whoever wants to jump in.
You can go ahead, Dylan. I feel like you have very clear, probably U.S. examples, and I'll complement.
I think there's been a lot of interest and a lot of focus right now on things like outdoor equity funds. And so we've seen that New Mexico was clearly the leader there, but it really built on a lot of efforts like No Child Left Inside in Washington and Minnesota, and Nevada had the program that recently got funded. We've now seen Colorado and California have equity funds, and other states consider it. And I think things like that are really powerful because, kind of going back to what Sarah said, where it's about the money, is that oftentimes those are small deployments of money that can really make a big difference, whether it's folks that don't have equipment or access to resources to do basic things like ski equipment or something, and you can actually, or fishing equipment, and get folks out there that would otherwise not have that opportunity. I think that, so things like that have been really valuable. I also think looking at some of these conversations around education have been really important to think about how do we integrate this into the larger school system, whether that's something with outdoor preschool licensure or outdoor school programs. And so step one is, how do you make this institutionalized? So you're creating this as nature, community spaces, et cetera, are part of this program. And then step two, I think, is looking at that belonging element, looking at that comfort element. And I think we've seen that in Oregon, in my home state, where there's an effort for that, but recognition that the outdoor school program has not been, I think the data doesn't show it's been as diverse as they had hoped and as equitable as they had hoped. And some of those barriers, I think, are ones that maybe you don't always think about, but it's just whether folks feel comfortable on the outside, and trying to like back that up a little bit more to think about how do we build that in from kind of an ecosystem of things like parks and recreation, et cetera. So that started from the beginning. So I think those have been very interesting to see continue, and we'll hopefully see more of those. I'm just looking at some of my notes here. And I think some of the other ones that have been really interesting, I have a colleague who's talked a lot about swimming and water safety efforts, and a lot more states are working on those. And there's been some there's been some research on how that disproportionately hit the risks there have impacted communities of color in particular. And so these are things where, even though it doesn't seem like it's an equity effort initially, it really helps target and create benefits for folks in the community, that then it opens up more of these doors and programming, et cetera. But it starts with states pulling these levers of how do we create institutional efforts and infrastructure and funding and opportunities that get people outside safely, help them understand how to get outside, build it into the school system so you're not asking folks to take additional time off, et cetera, but you're trying to make that part of the regular way of life. There's a Nevada task force right now looking at how outdoor recreation can be brought into public education systems. And so they're kind of repurposing a task force, and that's actively ongoing. And I think, to me, that's the big question. And the same goes for wellness, is how do you bring this into some of our systems that exist and make this just part of the solution that we all know it should be, but you make that just something that we all can experience on a day-to-day basis. And then that lets you lift up the community leaders, like many of you, because you're part of that solution, and the groups and the programs you all lead can be brought into that.
I knew you'd have some great ones. That was awesome. I would just add that just to pull on the thread that Sarah was also talking about, I love that you said intersectional solutions, because I think some of the things that we've seen sort of post-COVID, of the shock of COVID, of kind of recovery through COVID, and we had quite a bit of funds related to kind of COVID recovery in both Canada and the US, and communities sort of building new types of collaborations out of kind of that, in a way, forced collaboration during the pandemic. I think one of the things I've also really been inspired by is some of the kind of more community wealth building initiatives that have taken a really intentional also placemaking approach. So it's like, again, to Sarah's point and Dylan's point, like these intersections of thinking about what are these basic fundamental needs? Like, we want to build community wealth. People need to live and thrive in their communities. They want to stay in their communities. They might want to age in place. They want to grow up in the space, and certainly with a lot of external forces often pushing communities out of where they are living. I think there's been a really fantastic organizing around how do we actually do equitable development. Been very inspired by the work at the 11th Street Bridge by Scott Kratz. That work, I think, is transformative in terms of starting with a really strong engagement approach, but also around, again, this like community foundation of wealth building and local economic development first, before they even think about what kind of tree or park they're going to build. So I think that that's super foundational. I've also been inspired. There's this wonderful example. It's a Canadian example of Fogo Island in Newfoundland, where they've Zita Cobb, look her up. She's done some really fantastic work, really thinking about, again, how do we start with the foundations of, what do we know in our community? What do we love? What do we want? Start with building that local economic development and think about how does placemaking and creating, fantastic nature-based experiences and experiences outdoors relate to that. So this is definitely, I'm not an economist, and this is like new sort of intersection for me to think about, but I've been very inspired by this approach because I think it is bringing in an even bigger tent of folks into the broader movement of creating healthy places where people can thrive.
Yeah, thank you. And so many great examples. I think the 11th Street Bridge project is fantastic. I think certainly the Beltline in Atlanta is doing some great work, in India Basin in San Francisco. So it is that sort of, how do you, before you just run in and think you're going to build a beautiful facility for folks, you take a step back and you understand what that community actually needs and sort of engage them in the conversation from the very beginning. It's so important. So Amanda, you mentioned the pandemic and sort of the resources that kind of came out of that, but I also want to, we talk a lot about, at least in the Parks and Recreation side of this, specifically about how things like a pandemic, things like the racial reckoning, certainly that we experienced here in the United States during that same time, the sort of highlighting what nature, what parks, what open spaces, what recreational programming, what all the things that we do, how the folks in this sort of work really were able to step up and help communities not just be able to respond to, but hopefully begin to build new ways to thrive. Like, I think those are that to me was sort of the highlight of all of this comes together, right? And I think we are in this work uniquely positioned to build these sustainable, inclusive, thriving communities. So I'll say that just and thank you all for the great comments. I think we're going to take some questions from the audience here.
Hey,
sorry, go
Sus,
ahead, Sarah. Yep.
if I could there's just one other thing I wanted to mention for folks, and as we're getting questions in the chat here, and please, or in the Q&A, please add your questions. I wanted to let folks know that the Children in Nature Network's Founders Council has a report coming out be early next year that was authored by two of our co-founders, Richard Louv and Cheryl Charles. And they really brought together diverse perspectives from, our Founders Council is made up of some really incredible leaders from across, this movement: Howard Frumkin, Stephen Pont, Marty Erickson, a lot of other folks that help to contribute to this. And so the report is going to take, it is a trends report that from their vantage point in the movement, and they're going to take a deeper dive into topics than we have time for today, but just wanted to let you know that, they're going to be looking at kind of societal trends that are impacting our health and well-being and connection to nature. So we'll be sharing that out early next year. So I just wanted to flag that for people to watch for that. It should be really interesting and a helpful perspective for us all.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And as the questions come in, we have a question here, and this is probably the best question that we probably should have saved it for last, but I'm going to go with it because it's the one, and it really is about asking each of you, as in the work that you do, to talk about what gives you optimism for the future, because this is such exciting work, a lot of challenges, but what helps you get up in the morning and run to your work, and what are you most optimistic about? Dylan, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. For me, it really goes back to what I was saying about state legislators are really under-resourced, and most of them are doing this because they're passionate about it and they want to see positive change. And more we're seeing big seismic shifts in the legislatures, especially over the last couple election cycles. We've seen, the first majority female legislatures in several states now. We've seen increasing diversification across racial and ethnic lines, and we're seeing gender diversity and all kinds of things that are really providing new perspectives in folks that are bringing this in, different job backgrounds. We're having folks that are environmental engineers that are now state legislators and state senators. And I think with that, it's this excitement of folks coming in that want to break the mold and want to change things. And we're seeing those bills pass. Of those 200 that I said that were being considered, over 50 of those have passed this year. And so it's just really exciting to see change happening every year. And at a time where, the federal government is on the verge of shutting down every other week, it's a really important time to think about our states and how much they're doing. And that then filters down to the local level and creates opportunities. And at the end of the day, legislators they're out there, they are so much more in their community, I think, than folks realize. And I sometimes there's a little bit of this scare factor of, oh, it's a state senator. And, you feel like there's the DC effect of there's going to be an army of interns and office folks you have to get through. And it's really, most of them are hosting coffees at the local cafe, twice a month or something. You can just walk on in and say hello. And I really encourage folks to build those relationships, because those are folks they're birders, they're hikers and runners, and, folks in the park with you, and they're looking for those good ideas, and they need that input to come in of like, oh, this is a cool program, I didn't know about that. Or tell me more about why you didn't apply for this, or why you had issues with this. What were the barriers you reached, and how can we prevent those, or how can we overcome those? From my experience, these are folks that want that good idea, and they join our webinars at NCEL and say, wow, I just learned about, the equity fund. How can I do that in my state? Let's bring it in. And it's really a more the merrier perspective. So for me, that makes it exciting, because I see people really determined to make positive change.
And I would just add that I think a lot about those tenacious challenge like the folks challenging the status quo, the ones being really courageous, and the people really there on the front lines making those big changes that Dylan's talking about. I think a lot about how we're setting the stage for that, for especially children and for future leaders. So as a mom and as a leader, I think a lot about resilience and how are we actually creating and cultivating an environment where people do feel tenacious and courageous and taking risks, because we will need that. We need it now, and we need it definitely to address these big challenges ahead of us. And so this is one of the reasons why, and Laura will know this from the Children Play in Nature Committee, we talk a lot about, these experiences, these foundational experiences from a young age of being able to take risks and feel a culture of care. And I think you are absolutely right, Jesus. The leaders that we need, we are uniquely positioned to make this sort of change within the parks and recreation and nature-based sector, but we also need to cultivate that from the early experiences, and that means creating hope, optimism, and sort of empathy through these experiences early on. And it can be through family, for sure, but it can also be through your local neighborhood recreation center or your library. I've heard lots of really wonderful stories of, young leaders who, are really stubborn, which I feel is a really great quality to have as a leader. I certainly feel like I have a good amount of that. And it doesn't mean that they haven't what I'm trying to say is resilience is not really just enduring hardship. It's around having agency and hope in midst of hardship. And I think we learn that through experiences and having an actual community of care around us. And it can come in a lot of different ways for people. And I think we are uniquely positioned in this sector to provide a lot of those positive experiences, no matter what your sort of home experience is as well. Like, it can actually be cultivating this broader piece. So I totally agree with Dylan. I'm very optimistic about sort of what I see in terms of future leaders, but I'm also very concerned about our lack of facilitation of children being able to take risks and get outside and learn from mistakes. So I think that there's been a real sort of bubble wrapping of children, and I think that that's actually a big part of building some of that resilience for future leaders as well.
Anything you'd like to add, Sarah, about your optimism? Down with the bubble wrap, but
yeah, a lot of things give me hope. I guess I would just say that big picture, life on this planet, for human beings anyway, has always been hard and full of challenges. And I'm optimistic that smart, creative people continue to show up to say we can do better. And it's just I'm actually amazed. I got to participate in a vision lab that we did 2 weeks ago in Atlanta, where teams from around the country that are looking to advance equitable access to nature, like, these people show up, right? Like, there was, to your point, Dylan, there was a county commissioner, volunteer, but showed up, to come to this table to talk with others in their community about how they can increase equitable access to nature. So throughout our whole network, I mean, there's, it's heartening to see the network continue to grow, right? And the number of people that see these issues being relevant to their lives and their work and what they're about. And so, that gives me great hope. How about you, Jesus? What's giving you hope?
Yeah, no, I think to pick up on what we were just saying, like, I do, all of us have been in this work for many, many years, and sometimes it has felt harder, but I really am so uplifted and optimistic about the fact that so many more people realize not just how important this work is, but how we can all do it together. And I think that really brings me a ton of hope and optimism. Sort of communities in general are seeing that, nature is a way to help us all be mentally and physically healthy. Being outdoors together and communing and building community, like all the things that we do. People are realizing that are being much more impatient about the fact that we all need to do this, right? We need to bring everybody together. So, one other question. I think we have time for a couple more. This is a good question from Eric from Minneapolis, and his question is: you all have a lot of experience and knowledge of how city government works. So everyone here on the panel, beyond coming forward with this issue of funding, how can we bring nature-based solutions to the attention of your local leaders to advance this change? And I know certainly, Sarah, you and I have had a lot of conversations about this. Maybe you can kick us off there. How do we bring this to the attention of the local leaders?
Well, I think, Dylan, I might pick up on kind of what you were saying. I think, our local elected officials are actually more available to us than we maybe sometimes think. And, sometimes it's a matter of reaching out. Jesus, obviously, our new parks director here in Atlanta, but he's new to town. I reached out to him and welcomed him to the community, offered to introduce him to people. He was super grateful for that. So I think sometimes it's a matter truly of reaching out, building that relationship, finding what they care about, and looking to link these issues to the issues that they care about. Sometimes there's education that's involved, right? Like, but that all happens in relationship. And I think, to your point earlier, Amanda, about the equity work that so many organizations are focusing on. I mean, I think true equity work starts in relationship and building relationships, and I feel like those opportunities actually exist, maybe more than we think they do. Oftentimes I will say that, there's, using your own network too. Like if sometimes, okay, in a city like Atlanta, am I going to get to Mayor Dickens by myself? Probably not. But start to think about the people in my network and the organizations that he's connected to, and working and trying to figure out with others, how you raise the issues and get it on an agenda, and what that might look like. So, but I think it is really true. I mean, I think with, state officials, reach out to them and ask for coffee. Like, I think it's way easier than people probably think, just to build that relationship and get to know them.
Thank you, Sarah. Amanda or Dylan, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I have a couple I wrote down. I have four for you, so I'll make them quick. One is, I mentioned earlier that I got Salem to commit to the 10-minute walk campaign through the Trust for Public Lands. And that was a very easy one, because a lot of our planning already talked about parks being within a half mile. We haven't achieved that by any means, but it was already set out in some goals a long time ago. And so I went to the mayor and was basically like, this was in the plan already. We're not on this map. We can put ourselves on this map, commit to it, and then actually start getting some fanfare around it. And that's what we did. And we did a walk from a school to a park within 10 minutes. And we had, I think, like 75 fifth graders join us. We had the mayor and 3 city councilors and the parks director all come out. And, it was a couple hours, but it was a way to really get people thinking about this. And they heard from kids that are like, I live around there and I didn't know this park was here. And it's one of our really nice city parks. And so that to me is like step number one of just having people experience it firsthand and seeing how nice it can be to be outside together. And, at the end of the day, politically, the mayor in Salem, we have 9 people, including the mayor, on city council. And so we had 4 show up. So that's essentially 4 votes in favor of something you're going to propose. That's the doing the math approach there. My second one is, we're having some big budget issues in Salem. We had a payroll tax that did not go through, and so there's going to be some cuts. And so creating new things is going to be a challenge. But to Amanda's point, I've been talking with our parks director about the synergistic things. Children Nature Network, you've all been a leader in nature smart libraries. And so how do we think about green schoolyards with our school systems, libraries for nature smart libraries? How do we work with the money we already have put down in the city, and just think about how does that leverage our park system better? To me, that's an opportunity that's often overlooked. Number 3 is thinking about maps. There's a lot of students out there that are willing to do GIS mapping, and a lot that already exist. And when you look at some of these maps, like tree canopy cover or park access, it's a very stark and compelling argument when you show someone that folks here look at this part of Salem and there's no tree canopy, and look over here and it's 80% tree canopy. And those kind of things speak very loud, I think, and it helps give people that context. And then finally is showing up to meetings. I've chaired the Parks Board for a few years. We don't get many people that provide public comment. And if we do, it's kind of your same old folks that show up and you know who they are, you know roughly what they're going to talk about. We get a lot of pickleball people that show up that advocate. I will say, they say pickleball is fastest growing sport in America, and they have a strong local lobby. They will show up for any park plan. So we need folks to show up to talk about some of the efforts you care about, and just even making public comment there is really important, because there's not very many people coming. And so that mic is open, that mic is available to you to really talk about the work you want to be doing. Those are my 4.
Those are great 4. Just adding that I think funding is ultimately about priorities. And so really do the homework and find out what people's priorities are before you meet them, if you're thinking about asking or building a broader relationship on investing in nature-based solutions. And I think that investing is a better way to sort of position it. You know, it is an investment for health and wellness and, you know, driving local economic development. But those are the things that you have to sort of understand before that first meeting that Sarah talks about. I think you do your homework and you understand where people are coming and what their priorities are, because there is a really close line of nature-based solutions to any kind of priority in my experience. I think you can make that argument pretty closely and quickly. Similar to Dylan, you know, map assets. It's like a simple first exercise that we often do in communities. Like, what are the existing assets? That physical assets, institutional assets, community assets, cultural assets. What are the stories of your community? That is also an asset. So that's like a really simple, I think, starting point to that earlier idea of, you know, getting out of this scarcity mindset and thinking about all the abundance that we have that's already there in our communities. And then another just like quick piece of advice that I've found has been helpful in building authentic and good relationships with any kind of potential funder or partner or client or collaborator is, I think often we go into these meetings thinking about what we want and our agendas. Take a moment at the beginning and just ask what they need. And it'll really like change the dynamic right away. What is it you need? What are you struggling with now? What's a challenge that you currently have? And maybe there's an existing resource or an existing abundance within yourself or within your network that you can offer, that kind of offer of kindness or offer of resource or whatever it happens to be. But remember that you were yourself an asset going into it. You're not just coming asking for something, that you have a lot to offer as well. So those are mine.
Such incredible wisdom and perspective from this panel. I want to thank you all so much. I think we're out of time for questions, but I really, this has been a great conversation. I know we could keep talking for a couple hours here, so hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do it again. I don't know if Laura or Chris, you're going to wrap us up.
Yes, so unfortunately, we are out of time for questions, but I just want to extend a big thank you to you, Jesus, Sarah, Dylan, Amanda, for sharing your time and insights with us, and also for all of the work that you do on a daily basis to connect children with nature. I also want to thank all of our Children and Nature Network members. Thanks to our member support, we're able to offer virtual events like this free of charge. If you're not a member already, consider joining the Children and Nature Network to fund our work so that we can continue to do so. Members also receive a discount to our annual conference, and registration for our 2024 conference in Madison, Wisconsin is now live. In the chat, I will put some links on how you can join and also access the conference website. So thank you for everyone for joining us today. The recording of this event will be on our website in about 2 weeks, and it will be emailed out to everyone who registered as well. So thanks.